Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our panel. My name is Harald. I'm going to be moderating this panel. I will start with, you guys introducing each other, or yourself, and then we'll dive right into team structure and org charts, I guess. So, please.
Welcome. Good morning. Is this on? Yeah. I'm Michael Condrey. I'm the co-founder and studio head of development of Sledgehammer Games, developers of Advanced Warfare and previously Modern Warfare.
Hello, my name is Dorian. I'm working at Bioware. I've been working for 8 years. I'm a project development director. I've been working on the Mass Effect and working on the next Mass Effect.
Hi, I'm Matias Myllyrinne. I'm the CEO of Remedy. We're working on Quantum Break, which is a large exclusive for Microsoft. Previous work, we've done Alan Wake and Max Payne franchises, among other stuff.
Okay, so the topic of the panel is to give you guys an overview of the different kind of challenges that you have in your organization to communicate a coherent vision across big teams and how they grow over time and how that affects your organization. And I think in order to build some mental images of what your offices look like and your teams look like, maybe you can do like a 1 or 2 minute overview over, how big is, where's your team located, how big is it, and also just, is it a big office where everybody's in one room, or is it like more separate rooms, or is it cubicles, whatever? Just give an overview.
Sure. So for us, Remedy's always had, well, I say always, for the last 10 years or so, we've always had a separate building. I think that's kind of like our bat cave. It gives us an identity. We've been in business parks before, but honestly, when you're doing mocap shoots, running around with an M16 or a replica of an M16, the bankers get a little nervous. So having your own building is really, really cool, and it's a good part of the identity. The other side of that, obviously, is also kind of workspace. We've always had architects on our teams, and they're passionate about the workspace. A lot of the level designers or art directors are architects. So what we try to do is we try to make sure that people mingle from the different teams and the different sub-teams. So we're religious about only having one place for coffee and soft drinks and stuff like that, and we force people to walk down a couple of floors to get that. But they mingle. Large spaces, yes, for the teams, for communication. And the biggest and the coolest thing we've had so far is like loads and loads of small meeting rooms with kind of tinted glass windows. So you can see in, you feel like you can talk to people, but you just have a ton of space for those one-on-ones, budgets, reviews, and stuff like that. And everything can be booked from Outlook online, and you kind of have these tablets on the wall, and you can see who's there and how long it's going to run. So I think those have been like small innovations, but they're really, really cool. I've always felt collaborative about workspace. And for example, I've always wanted to sit with our CFO in the same room. We've done that for 15 years.
So in our case, actually, we have 2 different studios in Bioware Canada. There's the original studio of Bioware Edmonton, and there's one of Bioware Montreal. And they have actually very different layout of spaces. The one in Montreal is open, traditional place, but you meet a lot into new technology or video game. And the one in Edmonton is actually just, closed offices with 2, 3, 4 person. And what is interesting is actually both studios can deliver really great games, so ultimately the office space doesn't really matter. I'm personally a big fan of the open space. It's just easier for communication, but it has some of its downside also as well. I think what matters more than the space is more of the activities and event you have. It was interesting you were mentioning the coffee. So what we have is we have breakfast every morning, for example, in both locations. And that's just one of a great way to regularly mingle, meet the other person, discuss, and just by doing the breakfast every morning, eventually after a year, you know everyone in the company, right? Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, for me, I've been in the industry for almost 20 years, and I've worked at small studios and large studios. I spent almost 10 years on EA's corporate campus, and so I've had an experience with large structure layouts. Sledgehammer Games is in Silicon Valley, so it's interesting. We have some competitive challenges, I guess, opportunities, if you will. Google's there, Facebook's there, and these are large campus structures that provide a ton of amenities. And so you want to be able to be intimate and small and have collaborative open spaces, but you also need to recognize what the rest of the environment is providing. I got to tell you, Google and Facebook and these campuses are amazing. So we have a really special campus there, and right across from Sony's old location in Foster City. I don't know if you guys have been there. You're always welcome if you come to GDC to swing by and see it for yourself. I think for us, when we started the studio 5 years ago, we made the conscious effort to go to a open floor plan. Unlike EA, which was a lot of cubes and individual spaces, we felt like the collaborative nature of big open spaces to allow energy and conversation to flow was really important. And I think that's worked out really well for us.
Just really quickly, how big are your teams right now, or at their peak? Let's put it this way.
Sure. At our peak, usually our project is somewhere between 150 and 200 person.
I think we're running at about 107 on the big project right now.
We're about 225 at Sledgehammer with support studios for Call of Duty, bringing that number to probably 400 developers on a single project.
Okay, so we have these flip charts here, which we want to use for everybody. I think the easiest way is actually, if we have enough pens, yeah, we have enough pens, for actually each of one of you, all of you at the same time, to go out and just roughly draw your org chart, so that we can then talk about, okay, how does the vision get communicated across the organization? So go ahead.
Sure.
And I'll cover some time here while they're drawing. So the things we want to talk about is actually, there's some big challenges. When you grow the team from kind of where it starts to the peak, and we want to look into how does that change over time, and when you change the organization kind of in the middle of the project, what kind of challenges that impose. And other things is, I think it's with teams that big, and the biggest team I've managed is like 50 people or so. How do you make sure that people feel empowered and you challenge disengagement because you feel you're just a cog in the wheel and you can't really contribute to the big vision? So those are things we're going to be talking about. It's not a test how fast you are.
But I won.
You can see who's doing competitive multiplayer.
You want me to walk through mine?
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, let's do that. Let's be efficient. No pressure, guys. Yeah, so, okay, please explain it. Okay, let's start. So
I think for all three of us to try and cover our orgs and give you some takeaways in an hour is going to be really challenging.
Yeah.
So I went really high level on mine. But some lessons that I've learned over time and how we structured Sledgehammer. So first off, I'm fortunate to have a really great partner, Glenn Schofield. So I'm the co-founder. And the two of us have really organized Sledgehammer Games around this concept of the directors. And they really fit into sort of the creative directors, right? So the creative director himself, the audio director, animation director, art director. And these developers are empowered really to set the highest vision and really be innovative in where they want to go. And the peer group to that is the development side of the organization. These are the developers on the floor that are going to execute against that vision. So what you'll find is you'll have an art director, right? And he'll have a peer on the development side, an art lead or an art manager. And that's sort of a peer group set up to be collaborative and at times combative. This line here is a little artificial because neither side of the organization can ignore the challenges of the other. But on the highest level, the directors are really about making the most creative and innovative game they can. And the development management side of the organization is set up to ensure a certain amount of predictability, right? So on a game like Call of Duty, as you can imagine, we have to deliver a great game. Fans demand it. It's got huge exposure, right? If you under-deliver on quality, you're going to have a problem. But we also traditionally have to ship every November. That's part of the publisher obligation. So this structure is set up to have a ton of focus on innovation and a ton of focus on predictability. So you can get the best game possible and still hit that date, right? Now, I've been on teams where this side of the organization has been too powerful, too strong, and you'll get amazingly creative visions, no chance you're going to get it done on time or on budget, right? I've been on teams where this side of the organization is too strong, and you can get very modest design aspirations, but you're going to hit it. Predictability is going to be really high, and both are sort of failures, right? Really inspirational, it doesn't get out, or predictable, but not a great game. And so we've set up this organization to sort of have a balance between the two. And then within that, this represents to me just the nature of agile change. Your organization has to service the project, and your project is going to change all the time. Pre-production in the beginning to finaling in the end. Team size and structure, new components that come online. So your org is going to change, or at least at Sledgehammer, our organization changes all the time. We'll reorg the team, you know, in pre-production, focused on things like green lights. We'll reorg it midway through as we go wide in development. We'll reorganize it again at the end when we're trying to close the project out.
Okay.
So use organizations and know that they're going to be flexible. If you start and end your organization, a project, I believe personally that you've probably failed to leverage. Within this, we have cross-functional development pods and shared groups. So you'll have a pod of people owning a certain part of the game, say levels. That might be an environment artist, an engineer, an animator all sitting together, and then you'll have shared groups like audio concept. So even within that, there's some
And the
flexibility.
project organization is more agile. It's not waterfallish, or do you like?
Yeah, it's a balance. We're neither agile nor waterfall. There's a certain amount of creative iteration that you have to have.
Yeah.
I would say on Call of Duty, because the expectations are so high, we tend to lead slightly more toward a waterfall sort of scheduling process.
Okay. Dorian.
Okay, so mine is not really an org chart, or it's not the traditional one. I always like to start with actually the most important person, which is Bob, the programmer. It's just, you know, focusing on the people that matter, the people that develop the game. So what we have is actually a very agile structure. So we form basically into Scrum teams. The goal of the Scrum teams is to meet a certain part, a certain objective within the game. And so here you have Bob, the programmer, being part of a Scrum team, which is usually cross-discipline. Not always the time, depends basically on the objective. And then from there you have a a general support structure around it. The first one is we have what we call development manager, development director. We are here to support the team from a production point of view. We are the one who takes care of the scheduling, takes care of, you know, organizing meeting, helping, basically just unblocking the team as much as possible.
And the dev manager in this case, if Bob is a programmer, it would be like a lead programmer, or is
So no, the dev manager
really
would be the person in production, actually.
Okay, so really
that's a production person.
Okay.
Now, what is interesting is actually, I didn't represent it well on this thing, but sorry. You do have a lead, Bob's lead, which may be the lead gameplay programmer, for example, and which provide basically discipline and support. You know, it helps with estimates, technical know-how, those sort of elements. Then what you do have more on the vision side is you have two key components. You have on one hand the producers. Producers provide really a lot more player experience. They're not looking things from a discipline or skill set point of view, but just looking at it for, think of, we have a combat producer, and you know, he has a vision of how the combat should feel like. We have then our directors, you know, think of the traditional art director, creative director. Those provide constraints, right? Which is, you know, in art, this is the sort of art style we're shooting for.
So, but that means you have a creative director that informs the combat producer?
Correct. So both, I mean, I'm seeing that from the Bob point of view, but actually the producer and the creative director are talking regularly and are always aligned basically when they're speaking. And what happens is the creative director provides the constraint to the producer, and the producer transforms that into, okay, what is the deliverable from a player experience point of view?
Okay.
And we have a matrix structure where we have departments also as well. And so the departments are really not focused on the product, but just really focused on the people. They're here for the hiring, for training, for support. And so basically the idea is, it's a lot of different people, but it's also a lot and a strong support structure, and you know, you can go to multiple people to have different kind of support.
Okay, and in order to manage the schedule, so you know, in my team we also have like a project manager and then a creative producer and their peers, because you want to have that balance of quality and ambition and schedule. How does Bob know what's more important in terms of being on time or delivering this awesome experience?
So in case of Bioware, it's quite easy. There's quality always trumps and wins. in the sort of triangle of balance, with time resource. That being said, who provides priorities is the producers, who says that this thing is more important than this thing. The development manager, project manager, how you will call it, provides actually a lot of data for decision making.
Okay.
You'll be the one coming back, well, this thing is taking significant amount of time and it's blocking 2 other teams. No, actually, this should be a priority. This discussion with producer, priority shift.
Okay, great. Matias?
Sure. Let's switch it off. No. So the HR organization is actually really simple, so I didn't want to draw that because let's separate between a project organization and an HR organization. So HR-wise, it's like, okay, dev, support functions, and then that's the way it works. But looking inside the guts of a AAA production, it actually gets a lot more messy. And so I drew this. We have a leadership team for Quantum Break that report to me. That's 4 people. It's changed throughout the years, but right now I have 4 peers in that. It's our technical director, it's our game director, it's our creative director, and then it's our senior producer. So basically, those 4 guys make the decisions on the project level. 9 things out of 10, or 98 things out of 100, they can solve, and then they come, with the really messy stuff. It always ends up, and
It's a privilege.
yeah. Then you need to solve that. So obviously, there's a lot of kind of functional different things that go into a AAA production. The one thing that, if you take away anything from today, the one thing that we've learned the hard way is on the levels themselves. So we're lucky enough in the games industry to talk to different people. So we did something that DICE have done and on Battlefield, and we did something that Epic have done on Gears. So basically, we set up 4 independent level tracks that are totally autonomous. Now just think about that. Anybody who does production design, this is like 101, but too few people do it. So we have 2 gameplay tracks, so basically combat-focused tracks they have their own animation, they have their own audio, they have their own production. They're not interdependent. So if something goes wrong on track number 1, track number 2 remains on track and goes forward, so they can't ripple. The risks don't ripple. Then we have a 3rd track, which is narrative, because it's a very story-driven game as we do. And these people are the ones who are really good at pacing story and using stuff like that. And then we have a 4th track, hardening, making sure that all the covers are the same size, all the collisions work, all the kind of visual language is the same, all the ammo layouts and stuff like that are balanced. So this is actually the no-brainer, but it's vital for success on a large project to cut the interdependencies.
But, okay, just a question there. So you have one team that deals with combat and one with levels, but don't they interact a lot? Or?
So we've for like earlier on the project, and this is where it morphs, the organization morphs, you'll have a gameplay or combat team with programmers, AI, designers and stuff like that. But once you're in production...
Yeah, okay, so pre-production, you set that all up.
Yeah,
okay.
so once you're in production, we have 2 combat tracks actually, building 2 kinds of, combat-oriented levels.
Okay, and once you're in production, is it more waterfallish, or is it agile, or Scrum?
It tilts. Early on, it's very agile, it's very flexible, and everything's kind of, and then at the end, it's a factory. I mean, you got a date. All of us know the fact that once you get a date, like 12 months out, you're in a space shuttle. You're coming down at the angle of descent is like this. If you miss, you burn and you bounce into space because the marketing people are already committed money. The whole machine is running. You have a slate in the portfolio. You can't miss that date. And very bad things happen if in the last 12 months you would decide, oops, I don't think you guys could even shift a date. No.
Yeah, okay, so the next thing I would like to look into is how does, like when you grew the organization, and the topic is about getting the vision across, so I think it's when you're in a pre-production team and everybody's working on the same thing, it's rather easy still to create the vision, but once you grow, there's a lot of risk for it to fall apart and for people to feel disengaged and they feel like they can't contribute. How do you deal with, where did it change and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, I think Sledgehammer is a pretty interesting case study in that, Glenn and I founded it 5 years ago and it was just the 2 of us, a brand new studio. And, by the end of year 1, we were at 50, and the end of year 3, we were at 150, and now we're at 225, right? And each stage of that growth is sort of a psychology experiment, if you will, about social interactions and communication. I can tell you we haven't solved them all because the communication methods you're going to use as a team of 30 is vastly different than what you're going to do at 300. And so part of our exercise is understanding those inflection points and knowing when does the social structure of your team change, such as you have to change your communication style. But you're right, I think it's about, early on, it's that very intimate conversation. Everybody's in the loop, everyone feels empowered, everyone feels like they have an active voice. At 150, you're not in every meeting anymore. In all honesty, at 150, there are times where new hires come in and you don't even know who they are for a few days, and so you don't even have a social, connection, let alone a project connection. And so communication becomes, I think, the number one thing to focus on as leadership within any of these organizations, in my opinion, right? If you can't get the vision across from top to bottom, people are either going to not feel empowered, like they're not being listened to, like their ideas don't actually make it into the game, and that's terrible, right? Because at the end of the day, everybody on the team is a game maker for a reason. And two, if it's not clear, you will have parts of the organization drifting off focus, right? Just simple communication will break down, and they think they're executing to a certain vision, but in fact, they've got off target. So communication is key. We use tools like directors' meetings every Monday. We use tools like daily software reviews, where we get into our theater every day with the software in progress and review it with all the directors and all the leads. We do standing team meetings. We use standing meetings like Agile. And all that put together, we're probably still not doing enough.
And do you guys use like tools like have kind of enforce that everybody actually on the team plays the game? Or is that voluntary?
Yeah, we do very much believe in the idea that to service gamers, you have to be a gamer. I'll admit it's hard on our structure of 200 plus to get everybody playing every day, but we do very much build it into the culture of the organization. We do twice daily play tests. We'll actually take time out of the day at 11 o'clock and at 3 o'clock to have standing game time. So that's useful, and I'd encourage it for anybody who's out there making games. If you're not playing your game as a team and talking about it, you're missing out on opportunities.
I fully agree. This is something really, really important. So we're also striving to constantly have a minimal viable product, which means at any stage of our development, there is a game to play. It's really important. We have a say at Bioware, which is no play, no say. So anyone can provide feedback, no matter where you are in the organization. But if you haven't played, you cannot. So it's really important to play, actually. Another element we're doing regularly is, it's part of more a Scrum team, is the Scrum team play the game and review it. We do basically reviews where we're playing the game. We invite some stakeholders also, directors, like that, and we just talk about the game. And those are just the most efficient. Of course, this is easier as your production progresses because you have a game. It's more difficult in the early days of production because you don't really have a game. But once you start to hit, I remember at ME3 that moment where our multiplayer started to be fun and people were starting to play it and enjoy it. This is where all the crazy progress started to happen. Yeah. Just people know what to fix.
And for you?
I think we do a lot of the same stuff. I think there's, once you hone your style, you kind of end up in the same place. So I think very similar. Playing the game, and if it's in the build, that's critical. I'd say for the last, certainly last 9 months, Microsoft are really, really good. They've been our partner for a couple of projects now with doing testing at their labs in Redmond. So we're getting test scores for fun and engagement, and metrics, and how we're tracking on different levels and different chapters of the game. So, I'll know if a level is 3.9 in a score of 1 to 5 on fun, and where we're falling short if we are. So those metrics start to be really helpful as well, and we'll put those on the wall for the team. It's the same as, there's a lot of folks here who work in free-to-play. Having those metrics for your game, for a AAA production, you want the quality metrics on the wall, and the team will know. And what we do for visibility, and this is a no-brainer, we have stuff like this on each room, and each morning they'll say 3 days till their next whatever deadline, and it'll be what it is. And usually we work in like 8-week milestone sprints, and then those are broken into 2-week sprints, even if we're in waterfall, just so that we have the review gates in. And once they have like 2 days left and they're still in a buggy state, you can kind of feel the adrenaline. But that's how games come together. It's like.
And in terms of, so we've been talking about, okay, so you're in production, you're using play the game frequently so that everybody sees what's happening to make sure that everybody stays on track. But say in the initial phase, when you're in pre-production, who of your team and where gets the vision really gets set, and who does that? And then how do you create the assets so that as everything is still in an infancy stage, how everybody on the team knows what it's going to be when you still can't see it?
Yeah.
And then so that you make sure every one of your sub-leads or combat producers or story producers, that they know what it is that they have to execute against and build in their team. How do you do that? You can continue.
So, I mean, earlier on, I think it's a lot. It's different. You're exploring for tone, fun, pre-pro stuff like that. Usually, the team is small.
Yeah.
So and small is a relative term, but we'd start with like 4 people, and then go from there to about 20, then to 50, and then hack it together and build a demo. And does it feel right? And visual. We'll set visual targets, for example. Mm. So we won't do it in engine, but we'll just go in there with CG or whatever. Say this is the quality we want to hit, and this is what it's going to look like.
So you have like a target visual,
yeah.
And that's what the game's going to look like, even though there is no game yet.
Exactly.
Yeah, so there's 2 parts of it. There's the first one, which is, your EP project director and kind of a core leadership provides a vision of a game, like just high level, this is what we want to achieve. But the truth is, during the early stages, you actually do not have a vision. That's the whole point of having those early stages, is to figure it out, right? Yeah. So what happens is you have small teams, and they usually work on a lot of prototype. A lot of things are done quickly trashed, and it's kind of going through those that you're like, yeah, this one doesn't really work. This one, we're into something here. And it's through that iteration that suddenly you start to know what the game is.
Okay, so the key, yeah, and you do the same in terms of like keeping the team small initially, and then.
Yeah, it's interesting on Call of Duty. I mean, for us, it's a big team, and there's a tremendous amount of post-ship support and DLC that keeps a large part of the team going well after your launch date. The starting teams tend to be smaller. Several dozen initially, and so that's interesting, right? Because there's enough horsepower to actually do prototyping and make some traction. We've got an engine that we're advancing all the time that we're pretty happy with, so it's really quick for us to stand up in-game prototypes. I think the key for us is, we learned early on, and I'm sure these gentlemen share it, is describing in written or spoken word a vision is really difficult, right? The interpretation of those words can be very different per individual, right? And so for us, we have 2 things that we start off with. One, we want to show people what it means. And for us, we find the best way to kind of show the team that vision is through a process we call it Rip-O-Matic. And we'll take films, and we'll take clips of experiences within films, and we'll stitch them together sort of in a montage. So you can imagine in Advanced Warfare, we were taking little clips from Edge of Tomorrow and Black Hawk Down, and we're like, hey, we want this feeling, we want this mechanic type, and you weave it together in sort of a narrative. I really wish I could share that with you guys here today, because it's really powerful. You can put that in front of the whole team and say, okay, hey, imagine this in game. This is where we're going. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, it's a loose compass heading, right? Mm-hmm. It may be 80% of the final vision if you're lucky, but on day 1, it's pretty informative. Mm-hmm. The next stage for us then is to really show production quality examples of that. So we call it the X-Slice, and we will target a 10-minute experience in engine that demonstrates the gameplay and the visuals at ship quality, right? So it's different, and it takes a microscopic level focus of the team to pull that off. You got a lot of the team that's still doing prototyping and rapid iteration on future ideas, but we want to be able to stand up in front of our team and in front of our publisher and say, okay, hey, here's 10 minutes of one level. Imagine 6 hours of this. Or here's an example of the new movement set in multiplayer, for example. And that requires actually building that out in engine on your target platform.
I can imagine that must have been pretty difficult when you started the team, when nothing of that was there and you couldn't get it with a small team in a short amount of time.
Yeah, you have to pick your X-Slice sort of goals really carefully based off of how big of the team is and how familiar you are with your technology. When we started Sledgehammer Games, we didn't know what tech we were going to use, so we went out and evaluated Unreal and Crytek and the Call of Duty tech. And so we had a much more modest X-Slice. Now that we're done with Advanced Warfare and we've learned a lot and we know the tech and we know we're in this generation now, so the engine's pretty proficient. Our target is to do a 15-minute slice of our next game and be able to present that says, hey, this quality with this level of fun extended across the whole game, we think that's going to be a winner.
Yeah, I think, and just to second that, EA and I think it originally started EA, kind of whatever the core, the X and stuff like that. I think those apply to anything we're building. You know, we define these are the core pillars of this experience, and this is a scene or this is a moment that really defines it. Not having worked with on that at all, so no credit for that. But for example, some of the Medal of Honor stuff, when you're going onto the beach, you're attacking. That's a very kind of quintessential scene, and essentially that I think was for that development team. This is what we're going to create, D-Day. You know,
yeah.
It's a clear message, and you know if you can distill your message to that for your team, like, guys, we're going to do time amplified combat. What the hell does that mean? It looks like this.
Yeah.
And you can go, okay, cool.
But I would also imagine that that particularly as you grow and you want to keep people engaged in the sub-teams, culture becomes really important. So the quality of the leadership of the individual teams is very, very important. How much do you invest in like the quality of those sub-team leaderships, and so that, because if that breaks down at some point, then you lose it, and how do you deal with that? Like,
so I like probably the word culture. It has been probably our biggest challenge when we created Bioware Montreal. So Bioware has a very unique culture, you know, very proud of it, and we believe that that culture is what attracts the people we're attracting, and this is why we're making the game we're making. So when we started Bioware Montreal, we actually really wanted to preserve that culture. So we're not specialists into culture, so we just went with easy methods. The first one is to transfer people from Edmonton to Montreal as the heart. So you're like, okay, they know what the culture is, so we don't mess with it. And then the growth, and this was really the most difficult part, because you're in a new studio, you want to be ambitious, you want to do big things. But if you grow too fast, it's very difficult to control your culture, because the people you're attracting, the people you're hiring,
have their own culture.
They're going to change the culture, bringing their own culture. So we had the following rule, which was you never hire more people than what you already have. But when you think about it, it's like, you know, if you're 10% in a studio, it means you can grow to just 20. And, you know, with 20, you don't do a lot. But once you're 20, then you can go to 40. And so it was really a slow pace. And until you reach then 80, 100, then the growth is, you know,
but even so, faster. If you like double in size, the 10 to impose the culture, control the culture. Correct. To the other 10, I think that's going to be very difficult.
So the rule was not doubling, so never double within a year. So that means that the people you're hiring have a time to be immersed within a culture that already exists.
Okay.
And so we stick to that rule for the first 5 years pretty much, and I think we've been able to really retain a strong culture. I remember some people leaving Bioware Edmonton, they went to our studio, they came to Bioware Montreal and were like, oh, it's happy to be back to Bioware. I'm feeling exactly like they were back in Edmonton. With some differences, it's a different city, it's different people, but you have some of the same core values.
Yeah, and for us, I mean, I think the pace, if you're in a lucky position that you can do that, for us, we had 3 years in a row where we grew by 30. And that's a nice pace to grow at. You're getting 3 new employees every month. And that's clearly digestible, everybody can be induced, and but not everyone has that luxury. I mean, and you know, I get it, you can't always do that.
I think it is important, though. I mean, you touch on it, whether it's about growth rate or you're coming into a new existing team. Start by asking yourself, what is the culture, and how do you find it for your team? Do you think your team knows what the culture is? Could they tell you, back to you, what your culture is? For us, we've seen teams that can't define it, right? It's very loose, and hey, we're all here to make games and have fun and do quality. And that's not really culture, right? So for Sledgehammer, we started, I mean, that is kind of parts of culture, right? But that doesn't define a culture. And so we started initially by taking a hard look at what we wanted the culture of Sledgehammer to be. And we were fortunate we had a sort of a blank canvas, right? It was just Glenn and I and our experience. And so we defined it from day one, and we talk about it at every team meeting on a very high level, right? As sort of just a way to remind people. And, you know, our core value is commitment to excellence. Number one thing as a new employee, you're going to hear 50 times in your first week. It's a commitment to excellence. Within that, we've got 4 core culture sort of rules, if you will. Mm-hmm. Team first, really important to us. It's not about the success of the individual, it's about the success of the team. And people have to know that coming in, right? It's not a place you come to climb a corporate ladder, right? It's a place you come to make the team successful. Be attentive, work hard, have fun, right? Those are our sort of our 4 culture points. And then we reinforce it from team meetings to different cultural events to just sort of the day-to-day communication style within the lead structure, the sub-lead structure that you talk about, right? And you know, does it always stick 100% of the time? Probably not, like any big org, right? Everyone has sort of their own interpretation, but it sticks enough to know that when everyone comes in that building thinking team first and a commitment to excellence, they know what's expected out of them, and they hold us accountable to the same thing.
Okay. The hammering is a good point of just repeating it again and again. And I know a lot of people at Bauer have been making jokes about, oh, again a team meeting, oh, they're again going to talk about this. But that's just the best way to memorize and just, you know, put them on the wall, making sure that everyone knows it. And of course, like the most important area to really fulfill those values is the hiring process. Like that's the very first thing we check. We met some extremely talented people, but who had doubt about one element of our culture, and we're like, no, it's not worth it. Mm-hmm. It's not worth losing the culture just to bring, you know, someone who's just very talented in that domain, for example.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. I'm glad to hear you say that, because we found the exact same thing. I mean, it was a really great opportunity for us to start a new team. There were a lot of people who wanted to work on Call of Duty, and we didn't bring some talent. Some of the best talent that we knew didn't come in because we knew out of the gate it wasn't going to be a culture fit. And it doesn't take much, as I'm sure you guys know, a small pocket of disconsent or cliquish sort of anti-culture behavior can tear a team apart, right? And so preserve that. I'm glad to hear you guys do it. We do the exact same thing. We'll pass on really talented developers if they're not a culture fit.
Okay. And kind of going back to having the personal skill sets across the ladder to be a good communicator and a strong communicator, do you invest in the ability of the people to do that in terms of like coaching them or training them in communication techniques, and just to make sure you have a high quality communication? Matias?
So any day I'd pick competency over charisma, and you know, we're in a wonderful industry. It's a growth industry. You'll get people who are very articulate and very good at promoting themselves or their teams. I'd rather take the quiet guy who has the respect of the team, even though he's maybe a little introverted or something. But developers know if you're getting good stuff on screen and you know your stuff, developers know and they follow you. And you can just, I think, so.
I would say that's a very Finnish trait.
No, honestly,
if it translates to Silicon Valley.
Well, people will forgive you anything, and this is like a management book, I've read it for somewhere, but they'll forgive you anything in selecting a leader for them, even their insecurity or maybe even incompetence. But if you bring in a person with the wrong character as a leader, they'll never forgive you that. I mean, it's because then you've selected somebody with the wrong characteristics or values or whatever, and that's a disaster waiting to happen. That's one of the things you need to fix quickly if you ever get there. But yeah, in terms of communication style, stuff we do, we're diversified in that. I mean, everybody has their own style, and trying to modify it, I don't think it's necessarily worth it. I think as teams, we work on the efficiency of our meetings. So one of the best consultancy things we've ever bought was workshops on efficient meetings, like just little practices that you have in there. You always have a chairman, you always have an agenda, you always have, you know, objectives. Yeah. You're always tracking the time, dang, dang, dang. And you don't necessarily need to invite people there to, you know, maybe they get CC'd later, so it's the, you know, responsible, accountable, consulted, informed model. Stuff like that makes for better communication and efficiency. At least for me, it's more about the culture of how do you run things, process, structure, incentives, less than about picking people who are very good at communicating.
I think there is kind of two things we're doing for communication. There is more of the process side, which are exactly that, like DAISY, RACI chart, or you know, like good meeting practices, elements like that. There's another one, we've been doing a few trainings on that. We had quite a bit of success with that, probably with the leads, is just make them realize that people are different and have different style of communication. So there is plenty of training out there, but you're kind of categorizing people into, like, there's kind of 4 colors. You know, the blue that represent the very data-driven type of people, the red where are people very result-oriented, the yellow which are more the social people, the green which are more the people focused on empathy. And so, you know, if you, let's imagine you're a data person, you arrive towards the main empathy person and just throw him hard data without even saying healthy life, well, of course the communication will be a bit more difficult, right? So it's this sort of little thing, and we did that a few rounds of training across the past 4 or 5 years, and we found that people were communicating better after that, but that's more of a people aspect.
Okay.
Yeah, we do invest a lot in it. I mean, maybe it's a North American perspective, but we find communication and culture is sort of the defining competitive difference in our industry in North America. You can take a great team and have it fall apart from within, and that product's going to suffer, right? You can take a team that's average and inspired and communicating well, and they're going to deliver something pretty good. So we have a lot of resources. Activision, our parent publisher, can provide a lot there. I spend a lot of time reading. In fact, if for those of you who want to read a book from a North American perspective, the one that I found was really strong. It's called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team.
Yeah, it's a good one.
It's a great book.
And it's all about trust and communication, right? It's a fantastic book, and it focuses on just how communication styles and personality differences break down trust, and when trust breaks down, people make assumptions, and that leads to more distrust. And so, fantastic book. I'd recommend it to everybody here.
And honestly, you can read it in one evening. It's like
very easy to read, and it all summarized into one word: trust.
So, kind of coming to an end of this and summarizing, I think what I've taken from this is that you really start small. You build something that shows and not just describes, but actually shows the vision very early on, where it's still easy to have everybody informed. And then once you grow and scale, you make sure you have empowerment in sub-teams, but those who lead those sub-teams, they are already informed and they already have something that makes sure everybody understands that vision more easily. Is that correct?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's interesting. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but there was one point I think I'll leave it. I think we're getting down to Q&A.
We want to get some questions as well.
So again, maybe very North American perspective, but we had a military veteran come in and give a talk on inspiration and communication, and his final statement resonated with me, and I think maybe with the three of us, since we're in similar roles, and it was officers eat last. And the concept of officers eat last means that you put your team first, right? You always make the decision, you eat last, right? I'm probably not going to be as articulate as he was, but it really is about the sense that our jobs here, like, we work for the team. The team doesn't work for us. And for you in the crowd, when you get to a position to lead a team, remember that. You work for the team.
Okay. And is there you kind of already said that, but is there one thing that you learned growing the team and where you say this is something you absolutely should do or absolutely shouldn't do? So one key learning?
So that one is a very good one, what we call the inverted pyramid. For me, one of my really key learning is really culture. And the most important thing you can do in your job outside of making a fantastic game is the hiring and making sure that other people fit within the same culture and that you keep that positive cycle of just constantly having people sharing the same values.
I'd say focusing on clarity. I mean, it's very hard from a leadership position to give certainty in the industry. This is exactly what we're going to do, but you can point them into a direction. This is very clear. We're going here, and this is why we're doing it. And when people understand the overarching target, then they're better equipped to make decisions on the ground for you already. Not everything goes up. If they understand the bigger picture and the bigger targets, they can make the right choices, and the experts are there. They make better choices than the leaders do. I mean, the experts are there for a reason.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing a view into your companies and how you deal with it. And I think with that, we can open to questions from the audience. So we can have a seat. So, questions? I don't
Hi.
see much, so.
I have a question. I can guess that you work with people from all around the world. My question is, do cultural differences impact the way you work anyhow? Do they influence the processes?
Matias.
Sure. So 40% of our team come from other countries than Finland. We have 20 different nationalities, from Japan to the States to all over the world. We really want to recruit the best talent, and that means we're building games for an international market. We want an international team. The styles are different, but actually I think what the people have in common is we're really gamers at heart, and the culture in that respect is very similar. So we embrace kind of, you need to obviously understand that, for example, an Asian team member's comfort zone in space. He doesn't want to be hugged all the time, right? Whereas our Swedish friends are very big on hugging.
That's not true.
It is. Swedes are like Finns, but they have a will to live.
There was one more question in the back, I think.
Thank you. One of the greatest advice I was given was from a former submariner in the U.S. Navy who said that we have to learn each other's roles. We have to, because when you're struck on by a mine or whatever, in a very deep depth, everyone needs to learn at least one extra task. And I think that's a very good way to bond the team. If you as a programmer work as a tester for a little while, understand their process. If the art team work as not necessarily work as a programmer, but experience what the programmer has to do to make make the art work. That can bond the team and make them find shortcuts for each other in a very good way. Is there any other synergies like that you could have experience with or sharing that you could?
I mean, I can say something to that too, is that I really believe very much in cross-functional teams that are not departments per se. And that goes to what you say, is that if artists sit next to designers, sit next to programmers, then there's a lot more understanding for what needs to be done in the team, and you get this, they really work as a team, whereas every time I've seen strong organizations around departments, I've never really seen that work well, because you don't get what you described. There's not that understanding. It's more like us and them, and to me, that has never worked.
Another thing I'm a big believer in also is actually having role defined around people and not people defined by the role they are in. So what I mean by that is, I know you may be a QA tester, very good QA tester, and suddenly you want to help with level creation, level making, and while still doing your job, you end up doing actually someone else's job, and that's fine. Like, what matters is actually making a great game, or something when a lead will be doing some shadowing to help out production that is busy, or, a production person who used to be a programmer who helps with code. So it's just go with what is important for a game. The role is secondary, it could be anything.
I mean, there's a reason why, the conversation was more about the communicating the vision, but we talked a lot about the culture, because it's particularly dangerous to get into that space where the culture is as such that, just because you're the junior tester, you're not allowed to, voice your opinion and say, hey, this is really wrong about this product. And this culture of respect, and the team goes first, really kind of gets you there, where you have a buy-in from everybody, and where really everybody executes against the vision, and everybody feels empowered and has the right to say something, even if it doesn't mean that it's designed by committee, which is obviously nothing you want either.
Yeah, and for us at Sledgehammer, I mean, we found it's not always logistically possible, especially on a team of our scale, but context into what other people do can provide so much understanding of how to work better. So we'll have designers go to motion capture sessions to better understand what their animation partners do. We'll have engineers go to recording sessions with the audio team to better understand. Even if it's just a couple times a year where you can do a shadow program where one developer will follow another developer in a different discipline around for a day to kind of understand what their partner's challenges are and how to better sort of communicate with them. It's pretty easy to do. There's generally enough time for it.
You gotta watch your microphone, because if you're turning away, they can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry. So bottom line, if you have a chance to do sort of embedded shadowing, even a couple of times with partner disciplines, you'll see a huge payout.
Do you use like buddy systems when somebody comes on board, that there's a person that mentors that new employee for a while?
Yes, we do. I mean, we have usually you joining, so we have actually multiple people supporting, but yeah, usually you have one person that is not necessarily lead, that is just responsible to ramp you up.
Okay. Any more questions? Wait, the microphone is on its way.
Hi. Yeah, well, I'm a student from School for Games in Berlin. My question is about the difficulties in a team and how you, if you have a proper solution, or how do you deal actually with a difficult member of the team? How do you recognize him and?
So I summarized, like, how do you deal with, say, you have somebody in the team that's not playing with the culture, and how do you deal with that?
How do you find the right person? Is there a way to change them, or?
So that's a very good question, actually. In my experience, I found that people who do not share the same value as you can put as many effort as you want. And this is what we do. We always try to make sure that the person is understanding the culture and adapting to the culture. So it's a lot of discussion, a lot of adjustment. Most of the time, it doesn't pan out. Like, this is probably one of the primary reasons of people leaving Bioware, just people who just did not get the culture. But the first and most important thing to do is just to make sure that it's clear, and work with them to try to get it.
Okay, I think we need to close, but I think the answer to how do you deal with that, once you realize it's beyond repair, swiftly. Because otherwise it turns into, I've experienced this myself, if you'd watch this for too long, because you try to fix things, you try to have like this, you're telling yourself you have a positive culture, you want to give people a chance, but in the end of the day, it can turn into almost like a cancer cell where your team really gets problems, and it just gets bigger and bigger. So you should deal with it and remove the person from the team.
I mean, it's certainly one outcome, and you do have to do that if you get there. I would also offer, though, both within a team and with your fans of your games, you want people who are passionate. And sometimes people who are passionate have a hard time expressing it, or feel like they're not being heard, right? And so if you do get to a point where you recognize that you just have a damaging, cancerous sort of personality, absolutely move swift and don't permit it. But start by understanding that maybe it's just a person who doesn't feel like they're being heard. Because a lot of times it was sit down in a conversation about what they're trying to express in a more positive and healthy way, you can get past that frustration.
And I'd also say that sometimes, I mean, it depends obviously what the problem is, but performance management and helping people become good is a vital part of any organization. But because it's about coaching, it's about helping and putting people into roles where they can succeed. Maybe I'm an optimist or a romantic, but I believe that people have a right place somewhere. You know, they're meant to be, and they can play to their skills and their strengths. And it's up to the leadership to find those positions and to find those roles. And sometimes people don't want to do what they're good at, which is, they'll only figure that out later on. I mean, anybody knows that there are two types of producers. There's the closer, and then there's the guy who's really good in the beginning. But the closer doesn't necessarily do innovation that well, or vice versa. And finding those people in the right roles makes them a lot happier on the longer term, and helping them to see where their strengths are is part of managing and leading.
Okay, I think we have to wrap up. Thank you very much. I hope this was interesting.